report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines of this hour. The leaders Lee Jae-myung and Luis Inácio Lula da Silva held a summit in Seoul, agreeing to expand cooperation in trade, critical minerals, technology and culture, while signing 10 memorandums of understanding to elevate ties between a strategic partnership, while also adopting a 4-year action plan. Senior United Nations official Claudio Cordone and Syria's Justice Minister Mazar al-Weiss discussed efforts to strengthen Syria's judicial system, as the UN envoy said the organisation is ready to provide technical and legal support as Damascus moves to rebuild its judicial infrastructure. Palestinian media has reported that on Sunday, dozens of Israeli settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, performing Talmudic rituals under Israeli police protection. The incident comes amid heightened security restrictions in East Jerusalem. According to South Korea's foreign ministry, South Korea has urged the Russian embassy in its capital, Seoul, to remove a 15-metre "Victory Will Be Ours" banner displayed ahead of the 4th anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. New York City has declared a state of emergency as a powerful winter storm forced school closures across the US Northeast, while governors activated the National Guard and transit systems to suspend statewide services. It also reported that over 5,000 flights are cancelled for today. One of Mexico's most notorious drug lords, Nemesio Oseguera El Mencho, was killed in a military raid, sparking widespread retaliatory violence. Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi has confirmed that further US-Iran talks are set to take place in Geneva on Thursday. According to media reports, US Secret Service has shot an armed intruder at President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. And now to our top story of the hour. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has warned that a new sanctions package against Russia will likely face delays as Hungary continues to block it. Kallas, speaking before the EU Foreign Affairs meeting, said that despite strong efforts to convince Hungary, there was little expectation of change in its position. The sanctions discussions are set against the backdrop of the 4th anniversary of the Ukraine war, with Kallas stating that the European Union will not back down in its support for Ukraine. In Poland, Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski expressed shock over Hungary's lack of solidarity with Ukraine, pointing to the historical connections between the countries. He reminded that Hungary, having been invaded by the Soviet army, should understand the struggles of a country defending its territory against Russia. Let's listen in.
You know, the thing that shocks me fundamentally is that while Ukraine is defending itself against the might of the Russian army, Hungarians used to understand what it's like. You know, Budapest was invaded, in fact twice in the 20th century, but once by the Red Army. I would have expected a much greater feeling of solidarity from Hungary for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul voiced his surprise at Hungary's refusal to back sanctions. He warned that Hungary must not betray its own struggle for freedom and European sovereignty, pointing out that Hungary has a long history of fighting for freedom. Wadephul expressed hope that diplomatic engagement with Hungary would result in a change in its position, stressing the importance of continuing to support Ukraine against Russia. Let's listen in.
Ich bin über die ungarische Position erstaunt. Wir werden mit unseren ungarischen Kollegen darüber diskutieren. Ich glaube nicht, dass es richtig ist, wenn Ungarn seinen eigenen Kampf für die Freiheit, für die europäische Souveränität verrät. Und deswegen werden wir hier auch mit unseren Argumenten noch einmal in Budapest, aber auch natürlich hier in Brüssel an die Ungarn herantreten, dass man die Position überdenkt. Gerade wir Deutsche haben Ungarn viel zu verdanken. Wir wissen das und wir wissen auch, dass Ungarn am Ende des Tages sich immer für die Freiheit entschieden hat Und das sollte auch jetzt die richtige Orientierung geben. Und ich glaube, zu viele Gesprächsangebote an Russland können dort nur den Eindruck erwecken, dass man mit noch mehr Sturheit immer mehr Zugeständnisse erreicht, und das wäre das falsche Signal.
And now joining us live in the studio is Glenn Grant, a geopolitical commentator who is joining us live from Kyiv. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
you. Our first question to you is that Russia is Hungary is one of Russia's strongest allies in the EU, and Orban has also been in power for the last 15 years, but is facing an election this year. So do you believe that the blocking of this aid package is a move by Orban to drum up anti-Ukraine sentiment before his election, or is actually a strategic move to aid his allies in Russia?
Oh, I think it's a bit of both, and obviously he's got to do everything he can to actually to get support for his re-election, because he's not actually that popular, but he's still got quite clear and strong ties to Putin, and so he wants to do everything he can to actually to do Ukraine down and support Putin as much as he possibly can. But I'm sorry, I have to go back into the European Union for this, because they've known that this man has been like this for the last couple of years, and nobody has done anything about it. And I think they're hoping that he will go out on the elections. But if he doesn't, then they've got to do something, because we cannot have Hungary governing what the rest of the European Union wants to do and needs to do for its own security.
So the EU leadership, you're saying, is used to these movements from Hungary and Orban. Do you believe that there will be further concessions granted to Hungary to pass this aid package?
Well, they might, or they might just hang on until the elections to see what happens. But I'm sorry, I blame von der Leyen, because she's known for a long time what Hungary was like and has done nothing. And it actually raises my suspicions about her and her motivations for the whole thing, because she's not been the person that she should be to actually to support Ukraine in this whole effort.
What do you believe could happen if Kyiv can't fill this budget gap that they're facing? Do you believe that Ukraine will look for further funding from other sources besides the EU?
No, I think that well, I say no. I mean, that 90 billion has got to come from countries. So I think that Zelensky will then have to go back on the road and start negotiating one-on-one subsidies outside of the European Union. And he's done that before, so I'm pretty sure he can do it again. But it may not add up to the 90 billion at the end that he needs.
Okay, don't go anywhere now, and stay for us with our next story as we move to the war in Ukraine again. As it reaches its fourth year, the residents of Kyiv reflect on the toll that it has taken and are acknowledging the ongoing struggles like blackouts, the challenge of securing stronger support from European nations. Despite the fatigue, there is a collective determination to endure, with many prioritising time with loved ones and believing the war may continue until Russia's economy is exhausted. At the same time, a Russian drone attack in Ukraine's southern Odesa region has killed 2 people and injured 3 more after it struck a truck stop, causing a fire. Rescuers continue efforts to contain the damage as tensions remain high. Let's listen to what the residents had to say.
Я бачу, що фронт тримається 4 роки. В принципі, як би там що не говорили про владу, не така, але вони, я бачу, можливо, там є і корупція, і все, але люди роблять, намагаються зробити щось щодо завершення цієї війни. Якось так, не хочеться зовсім падати. Якщо вистояли 4 роки, то хочеться вірити, що вистоять і далі, бо виходу.
The United Nations Human Rights Chief warns that the world is experiencing the most intense competition for power and resources since World War II. This fierce struggle is playing out in regions like Sudan, Gaza, Myanmar and Ukraine, where widespread rights violations are occurring. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also condemned the global assault on human rights, stressing that international law is being undermined by the rule of force. Meanwhile, the UN's Human Rights Office is facing severe budget cuts and attacks on its experts, threatening its ability to function. Joining us again, we have Glenn Grant, geopolitical commentator from Kyiv. Thank you again for joining us, Glenn.
Thank you.
And now, for this year in Davos, we've seen Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney saying that we're seeing an end of the rules-based international order, and he's urged middle powers to come together. Do you believe that we're seeing a breakdown of the commitment to human rights by the global community after World War II?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of things that are not going well, but I think that human rights is a symptom, not the cause. And I think that people have got to understand that the cause is that the rich and powerful across the world have become too powerful and too rich, and have started to shape the world in their own way. All this comes out in the Epstein files, and I think that if the UN wants to do something, then it's got to support the following through of the Epstein files by law enforcement agencies in every country until all the badness is weeded out. And I think when that happens, you will see human rights improve all over the place.
In that respect, do you believe that conferences like Davos actually harm the cause of human rights rather than help it, as it is a gathering of the rich and powerful?
I do, because all they're doing is continuation of their own rules and regulations. And I'm going to say ordinary people are just being abused by that. I mean, how can you have, climate change conferences when everybody flies there by plane? I mean, that is their own plane, not just by plane, but their own planes. That is just so disgusting. It's untrue. And all these things are part of the same game, you might say. So there needs to be some sort of resurgence, and I'm hoping that we get a new America out of all of this, and that the decent people actually win through. I have to say they are fighting extremely hard at the moment for human rights against the Epstein files.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Glenn. Now moving to our next story, India has amended its tax treaty with France, removing the most favoured nation clause, the finance ministry confirmed. Furthermore, changes have been made to the country's dividend tax structure. The previous flat 10% tax rate on dividend income has now been replaced with a split structure. Dividend income will be taxed at 5% for shareholders holding at least 10% of a company's capital, while all other investors will face a 15% tax rate. This update comes after a deal between India and France in December 2025, where both countries agreed to revise their 1992 treaty. The revision aims to halve the tax on dividends paid by Indian units to French parent companies. Meanwhile, these changes reflect India's ongoing efforts to strengthen ties with France and streamline its tax policies. Now joining us live is Dr. Ajay Dua, who is the former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, joining us from Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dua. Do you believe that these latest changes will facilitate further investment between India and France, given that Modi and Macron have designated 2026 the year of India and French innovation?
Thank you for having me in this discussion. I'd like to start by mentioning that last week when President Macron happened to be in India on a state visit and thereafter to attend the Global AI Summit hosted by Prime Minister Modi, they signed a host of agreements to amend certain existing laws as well as to enter new arrangements of cooperation, and the two all put together, the two heads of government said, we have now moved into a level of strategic partnership between the two countries from what was earlier probably a less strategic or what would one say, a common kind of a partnership. Having said that, they signed about 20 cooperation agreements were signed. One of these was to revisit the arrangements which exist today for what's called the MFN, Most Favored Nation Agreements, the arrangement which exists that, what the MFN is really, that if a country which is a signatory to the MFN arrangements lowers the taxes for one country, this will automatically apply to others as well. That means there was an automaticity that and that's a WTO endorsed arrangement and probably even precedes before the WTO was set up. This arrangement was struck down in a particular case by the Indian Supreme Court. It happened to be a case of Nestle, the Swiss company, that unless the Supreme Court of India had said that unless it's specified that who is going to be the beneficiary of the MFN arrangement, automatically the country cannot claim, and the country which is seeking it cannot ask for it unless it's been put in black and white. So to get over the Supreme Court of India's ruling during President Macron's visit, the government of India endorsed the idea that MFN, France, the jurisdiction of France is covered by the MFN arrangements between India and France now. So if India gives a benefit of a lower duty to any other country on a particular commodity or a service, that will automatically apply to the French providers as well. And in the instant case, the issue before the French government which was raised was extending technical services to India under the mutual partnership, the bilateral partnership which is now it's going to be called. The three sectors which have been identified are defense manufacturing, aerospace, as well as technology transfer. So technology transfer between the two countries would get facilitated now that the technical services have been covered under the MFN. That's number one. The second arrangement, which was also made during this visit, was with respect to the dividend tax. The French government had sought that, seeing that there's a bigger partnership in the offing, and in 2026, as you mentioned, would be the year of cooperation between the enhanced cooperation between the two countries, that there is the dividend which will be required to be paid by the companies in India set up with French assistance. That means the French companies have equity. If the equity of the French company is higher than a threshold limit, then the promoters of that, the people holding more than 10% share in that company, the French companies, will be required to pay only 5%. Whereas earlier the arrangement in India is a flat common 10% dividend tax applies to everybody. And I'm sure that the Indian government would have negotiated well. So they made a distinction. They said, all right, those people who are holding a higher holding, the French companies, they can pay instead of the 10%, 5%, but those who hold less than the threshold limit, they will instead compensate, and those small investors who are not really, majority control, I wouldn't call it majority, a sort of a bigger control of the company, they will be required to pay 15%. So this meant the amending the treaty between France and India, on which we had entered into in the 1990s. Two changes made, as we just talked about. One, the application of the mutual most favored nation duty rates, now applicable to France as well, and in that the beneficiary is going to be the technical advisory companies from France. And second, the investors from France, who are the sizable investors, they would be required to pay only a 5%. It's a withholding tax that whatever dividend you earn, the government of India was holding back 10% under the nomenclature withholding tax. That will now stand reduced to 5% withholding tax instead of the earlier 10%. And if you are holding more than, say, 10% of the company's equity, but if you are holding less than that, the French companies or any other French companies basically, this will apply to them only. They will be required to pay 15%. These were the two changes and the context, as I mentioned.
All right. And do you believe that these changes will affect ordinary taxpayers in India and France and not just the industries and the shareholders themselves?
I don't think so. This is applicable basically to the dividend lowering or splitting of the dividend tax at two rates will apply to people who hold equity in the subsidiary companies which will be set up by the French companies in India. So indirectly benefiting the shareholders of the major companies in case a common man holds stocks in it in France. Yes, some would flow, but not a direct benefit. Similarly, the most favored nation agreement of that the lowest import duty rate would apply to them would also be coming through an indirect route, but certainly because it will go to the people who are providing the technical services, the companies which are providing it, they can also get the benefit if India lowers it with anybody else, whether by way of a treaty or a general, that benefit will go to French companies. But as shareholders of the French companies, smaller people or a common man in France might benefit, but not directly.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary of Commerce and Senior Economist. Now to some tech news. Apple TV has signed a distribution agreement with Everpass Media to bring its live sports programming to commercial venues, including bars, restaurants, hotels and gyms across the United States. The deal marks Apple's latest move to increase the visibility of its sports content in public spaces, where big screen viewing and group audiences could help drive subscriptions, foot traffic and brand loyalty. Apple TV's sports lineup includes Major League Soccer matches, select Major League Baseball Friday night games, and Formula One coverage in the US. Everpass said Apple TV Sports will be available through its core package at no extra cost to new and existing customers. The company already offers a premium library featuring content from Paramount+, Prime Video, and major US and international sports leagues. Everpass CEO Alex Kaplan said Apple's sports content adds breadth and global appeal to its offerings as streaming giants compete for attention beyond the living room. In the UK, Manchester's Gorton and Denton constituency is experiencing a political shift as Greens and Reform UK push for victory in a by-election to replace the stepping-down Labour MP Andrew Gwynn. Labour is facing strong competition from both sides, with the Greens gaining support among younger, diverse voters, and Reform UK making headway among older working-class communities. Candidates from all three parties have campaigned hard, but polling indicates a tight race, with the Greens narrowly ahead. This election could be a major test for Labour leader Keir Starmer as his party struggles with divisions and a series of policy U-turns. Let's now have a look at what the Green Party candidate had to say.
So I think the choice here is between, to be quite honest, it's between hatred and division, and it's between someone who can bring hope, but ultimately who will work hard for her. I think we know that we have to earn people's trust, and that's something that you can't do overnight, and I've done that in my role as a councillor for the last 3 years. I've worked really hard with my community to show that I'm there to support them, and I think people do just appreciate being honest about what you can achieve as an MP. I think we see political parties make so many promises to people, and people aren't stupid. People just want somebody who's going to work hard.
And now to Latin America. In Venezuela, hopes for freedom have risen following the release of prisoners under the newly passed amnesty law. On Sunday, former prisoners were reunited with their loved ones outside El Helicoide prison in Caracas. National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez confirmed that hundreds of prisoners are being freed under the law. However, human rights groups argue it falls short for many political prisoners as the law excludes individuals involved in military-related offences. Meanwhile, more than 200 political prisoners are on hunger strike, demanding to be included in the amnesty. The new legislation passed after the capture of former President Nicolas Maduro has sparked mixed reactions, with some opposition figures criticising its scope. Let's listen to what opposition politician and released prisoner Juan Freites had to say.
Yo fui liberado bajo la ley de amnistía, una libertad plena sin restricciones. Y así como yo fui liberado sin restricciones y con libertad plena, deben ser liberados todos los que quedan. Y esta lucha no puede ni desfallecer ni disminuir a medida que vayan escarcelando y liberando cada uno de los que quedan. Más bien tenemos nosotros el reto de que esta lucha se convierta en un movimiento cívico que pueda unir a toda Venezuela en una sola voz. Libertad para todos los presos.
And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.